And we're live.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our regular council meeting for Monday, July the 25th. Call the meeting to order at 6:30. And just a quick update, Councillors Hall and Bonato have given regrets this evening. Councillor Hall is away for work and Councillor Bonato is under the weather. So we wish him all the best and we'll see him at the next one, I'm sure. So to get started, I would ask that everybody who's able to rise for the playing of O Canada. We would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that the town of Shelburne resides within the traditional territory and ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, including the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Chippewa, and the people of the Three Fires Confederacy. These traditional territories upon which we live, work, play, and learn are steeped in rich Indigenous history and traditions. And it's with this statement that we declare to honor and respect the past and present connection of Indigenous peoples with this land, its waterways, and resources. We encourage residents to review the call to action information by visiting the website link, which is shared on the screen, to provide further research and to educate oneself. Just a reminder that members of council are required to declare any pecuniary interest that they may have with respect to any item on the agenda this evening, and those declarations must be made in accordance with the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. On to the minutes. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes from our July 11th council meeting? Moved by Councillor Buffett, seconded by Councillor Fegan. Any discussion on those? All in favor? It's carried. Madam Clerk, are there any questions submitted for this evening?
No questions this evening, Your Worship.
Okay. So we have a proclamation tonight for Emancipation Day. Whereas August 1st, 1834 was the date that slavery was abolished throughout the British colonies by King William IV pursuant to the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833. And whereas within 15 years of the abolition of slavery, between 35,000 and 40,000 Black settlers made their way to Ontario, in large part by the Underground Railroad into southwestern Ontario. Now, therefore, as an expression of our respect for human liberty and freedom, and in recognition of the richness of the culture and history brought to Ontario by African Canadians, I, Mayor Wade Mills, do hereby proclaim August 1st, 2022 as Emancipation Day in the town of Shelburne. Are there any council inquiries for this evening? No? Okay. Well, we'll move right into the agenda. So we have three reports from our planner to get started. The first is an application for part lot control exemption with respect to the Emerald Crossing development. So Steve, good evening. How are you?
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, everybody. I will just run you through a quick presentation just to use some graphics to explain what this report is about. Did that come up okay, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
So the application for part lot control exemption has been filed by Fieldgate Homes on behalf of the owner of the subdivision, which is Shelburne 89 Developments Limited. And it's for the townhouse blocks in the subdivision, and the addresses and legal descriptions of those blocks are indicated here at the bottom of the slide. Just to orient you to where that's located within the overall subdivision development, there are 3 townhouse blocks along the west side of Red Elm Road, which is the road that will run in and around behind the future park block. So the commercial block is here, Highway 89, Main Street at the south end, and County Road 124 over here, Anisha Nelby Drive along the middle, and Ojibwe Road here. The other 6 blocks that are subject to the application are located here, surrounded by Anisha Nelby Drive on the north, Ottawanami Crescent on the south, and Ojibwe Road on the east. So just to focus in on the 3 blocks on Red Elm Road, this is turned a little bit, so north is not straight up on the page. It's to the right. The 3 blocks on Red Elm Road backing on the park block are proposed for 6 units each. Those units have been approved for building permits, and they are under construction, I believe. And the purpose of the part lot control exemption application is to temporarily lift some of the restrictions of the Planning Act to allow the individual lots for each of the units to be surveyed and registered by reference plan. That allows each unit to be owned as a freehold unit, separate from any other unit in the block, rather than these units becoming rental or condominium ownership. So I've only provided just one example here, but the full suite of reference plans that were submitted by the applicant are included with my report. Just again to kind of highlight the key information on those plans. The outer boundary in this case is the limits of block 206. So that's the original block created when the subdivision was registered in 2021. The new lot boundaries that would be created by reference plan, subject to this part lot control exemption bylaw, are the blue lines internal to the block. So what that would effectively do is allow a part to be registered for each unit, as well as its surrounding front and rear yard areas, and in the case of the end units, the side yards. So the yellow area highlights where the building is located on the block and the size of each dwelling unit there within the new lots to be created. And then just shown in the kind of purple gray color is there are 3 easements that are proposed within this block. And the reason for that is, as you can see, the front of the building jogs in and out with the design of the units. And so these easements give a small area of maintenance access for the respective homeowners. So for example, the owner of this unit on the end could access this small part of his neighbor's property to access this little corner jet out of the building in order to perform maintenance on his unit if that's ever required in the future. And then similarly, this easement would be in favor of the owner of part 4, and this easement would be registered in favor of part 1. So the town is not a party to those easements. Those are strictly private amongst the unit holders, and there's no town access required or proposed for those easements. The other block that's subject to this application is, and this is attached to the proposed bylaw, is for 6 townhouse blocks, so 6 buildings total. And you can see that the end blocks are 6 units each, and then the middle blocks are 5 units each. So that's a total of 34 units. The other 3 blocks were 18 units. So in total, we're talking about 52 townhouse units, which is the total approved with the original subdivision approval. There is one piece of information missing from the draft reference plans that were submitted by the applicant, as outlined in my report. So the final reference plans will be required to add these easements in favor of the town, which are required by the subdivision agreement. So between blocks 210 and 211 and 210 and 209 are storm sewers along the common lot line with a rear lot catch basin. And what that does is it catches the drainage across the back of these blocks into a catch basin in each location, and then drains that via an underground storm sewer into the municipal storm system that will be located in Potawatomi Crescent. So those, we've notified the applicants that those easements need to be added as parts on the reference plans for these blocks. So we have circulated the application to the required agencies, and we've received some responses, but no concerns or objections to date. Subject to council's authorization tonight and receiving those updated reference plans showing those easements, the next step would be the bylaw would be registered on title to those blocks. The owner would then be responsible for having their surveyor deposit the final reference plans, and then that allows the remainder of the building construction to be completed on those townhouse units so that they can ultimately be sold on the closing dates for the individual homeowners. That's my report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Steve? Councillor Fegan?
I'm sure this has been addressed before, but I just want to make absolutely clear, we've already looked at the capacity for all of these, and we are well within our limits within this. As far as the
through you, Mr. Mayor, through wastewater capacity.
Yes.
The original subdivision approval included a commitment of the necessary servicing allocation. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anybody else? Okay, so the recommendation is to receive the report and to provide leave for the reading and enacting bylaw number 38-2022, which is a bylaw to approve the application for part lot control exemption. I have a mover and seconder for that. Moved by Deputy Mayor Anderson, seconded by Councillor Fegan. All in favor? It's carried. All right, next is another report from our planner regarding the county MCR and the revised land needs assessment.
Yeah, and I didn't prepare any slides for this one. I'll just briefly highlight some of the information from my report. You'll recall back in about the middle of March, I prepared and presented a report that summarized the initial outcome of the draft land needs assessment that the county has completed. Basically, the land needs assessment, or the LNA, is a part of the MCR that determines how much land each municipality will need to accommodate forecast growth based on some draft growth allocations that the counties come up with through their studies. And this is all leading to an amendment to the county official plan to update the forecast to the year 2051 as required by the growth plan, and to set the urban boundaries of each municipality where they need to be to accommodate that growth. So in the last report, you'll recall we had some concerns about the growth allocation. Effectively, it would have doubled Shelburne's current population to about 18,000 over the next 30 years, and would only add the remaining land on the west side of Shelburne to the municipal limit. Obviously, this isn't the process for any municipal boundary changes. Our concern was that if that's the level of growth that we are to plan for, then there should be some mention of the need for municipal boundary adjustments in the future. There's no process in place or started right now to contemplate that, and our servicing work to date has been based more on a population range of 13,000 to 15,000. So certainly it does simplify things for the town to continue to plan for up to 15,000 people. I will note that that allocation is not a cap on Shelburne's planning for growth. If you achieve more than that within the boundaries that get set through this process, that would actually be welcomed by the growth plan, because you're intensifying and achieving a higher density than you were otherwise required to. So I do think that it's an improvement and a good response to our comments to align the 2051 forecast with what the town has been planning for to date, and make sure that it isn't reliant on a municipal boundary change in the future to achieve the growth forecast that goes into the county official plan. It does give the town flexibility as well to plan for more growth than that, as long as it doesn't mean using a higher number to justify an urban boundary expansion beyond the current municipal boundary. It does suggest that, there isn't any urgency then to pursue any annexation of land. We are getting regular inquiries about that from people looking at land around Shelburne's municipal boundary for future growth. So, council should be aware that by, accepting this kind of allocation of 15,000 people, it will be probably at least another 5 years before we would see an increased allocation of growth that might trigger those types of discussions. But it is up to council to decide whether it wants to enter into any negotiations with adjoining municipalities regarding any municipal boundary changes independent of the MCR process. I've highlighted some of the changes that were made to some of the other municipal forecasts and land needs as a result of the revised LNA. And in your agenda package, you'll see that there is a letter from Grand Valley to the county, highlighting some concerns that they have about the draft LNA as it was initially released. They have a map, identifying a longer term growth area that they would like to have accommodated through the process. And basically the concern is the amount of growth allocated to Grand Valley in the draft LNA wouldn't allow for that much land to be designated through the county MCR. I did talk to Grand Valley's planner about this, so there has been some coordination amongst the local municipalities as well as with the county. And there have been regular meetings of the county planners with the local planners to talk about these things. And I indicated, Shelburne doesn't have any immediate concerns with Grand Valley requesting additional land. The only consideration would be if there is an impact to, Shelburne's expansion. And we've highlighted in our report here that ultimately the main concern, at least from my perspective for the town, is that the municipal boundary and the urban boundary align as an outcome of this process, so that we're not left with a little bit of land outside of the urban boundary that's still in the town boundary, because it's been a long time coming for the land to finally get designated for urban uses, which is what it was ultimately annexed for many years ago in the first place. So we're hopeful that even with the changes and the reduced population number, the county process will result in that. And we have highlighted that with the reduced growth allocation, that does also come with a slightly lower expectation in terms of intensification for Shelburne, because it's a percentage of a lower number, but it is still very much a more aggressive and ambitious target for intensification in Shelburne. That will mean having to revisit current policies, height limitations, density requirements for the downtown area in particular, which is really kind of the last area for substantial intensification. And so what we've highlighted here again is that the main concern with that is the volume and type of traffic that Highway 89 and Highway 10 have today and have accommodated in the past are not conducive to that level of intensification. So, and we're putting some emphasis here on the need to have that county transportation master plan, coordination amongst the county, the province, and the town to ultimately find and plan for a suitable bypass route for truck traffic so that we can properly plan for a pedestrian and transit-oriented downtown, alleviate parking requirements, all of those things, and achieve some of these intensification objectives that are before us. So I've really emphasized those 2 points, to the group at the table when we're talking about the MCR, that those are the 2 main items of concern for Shelburne. I will note that the employment forecast here that the county has identified for Shelburne is indicating that the town may have a slight surplus of employment land. I've indicated that that isn't my experience, that in fact, although there is some vacant land, it is all, spoken for, in that people have plans for that land, and anyone coming into town with a new plan for some kind of employment use really doesn't have anywhere to look, because everything is either in some kind of development ownership or under a plan to be developed ultimately. So there's some limitations there in designating more land for employment use as a result of this process, but it is a process that is supposed to occur approximately every 5 years, allowing for further updates. I've discussed in the consultation and communication section some of those discussions with Grand Valley as well as with other town staff and the engineers, just trying to coordinate our inputs and responses to the county as much as possible, especially as it relates to the servicing and infrastructure studies that are being undertaken at the same time. So I think that's the summary. The recommendation here is just to receive this report and essentially feed it into the county as the next kind of round of comments based on the revised draft LNA. I've highlighted some information from the county about the timing and next steps. And I would be happy to take any questions about the report and the process as I understand it. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. And just before I jump to Councillor Buffett there, I'll just provide a slight little bit of context with respect to the process at the county level. So the MCR process, I mean, it's sort of an all-encompassing exercise, obviously. But different lower tier municipalities at the county table seem to be in different positions with respect to our ability or our appetite to move forward with things. As all of you are aware, obviously, Shelburne is quite settled on what our urban boundary expansion would look like on our west end. Grand Valley is in a similar situation where they're eager to get going with some developments. So going back probably about 2 months at this point, we did get consensus at the county level to at least permit moving forward on an incremental basis. So Shelburne, Grand Valley, for instance, could move ahead with the amendments as they relate to our municipalities without everybody else from the county having to kind of have their ducks in a row. That was presented by county staff to the ministry and was welcomed, I think, warmly, except that the ministry said they did want the land needs analysis done before they would consider those sort of incremental applications. So that's sort of where we're at now. There are still obviously ongoing discussions about the LNA, but we do have a special meeting of county council called for August 18th, and direction at our last meeting was for staff to kind of compile the last bit of input from municipalities, from the public, and to basically present a final version of that to county council on the 18th for consideration. And just one more thing I'll add, that there is a public meeting tomorrow at the New Horizons room at Mel Lloyd from, I think it's 11:30 till 6:30. And that's for any member of the public to come in and sort of learn more about the MCR process and to give any input that they may have. So with that, Councillor Buffett, you had a question.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to ask Steve through the mayor, with regards to the comments you were making about the industrial lands and the fact that we really don't have enough industrial land to be able to provide for more jobs and more growth in that area. I guess I have a problem with that, and I just wonder, is there anything that we can do to suggest that we could do that at some future date without it being too far down the road?
You can still designate some land for uses that will create jobs in conjunction with what's referred to as community area designations. Basically, it's everything else except industrial type of uses. So institutional, commercial, even storage type uses, those kinds of things could be accommodated on some of the expansion lands. After the county finishes this process, and if the remaining land in the town's municipal boundary gets added to the urban boundary, then the town gets to decide, how are we going to designate this land for what types of uses and what's the mix that we want to achieve. We do know there will be a need for more than just housing. There'll be a need for some additional institutional land for some parks and open space, for some commercial to feed those neighborhoods, and quite possibly some opportunity for some quasi-employment uses as well, service uses and things that provide job-creating land uses. So we have given some thought to potential areas for that. One of them is along the west side of Victoria Street would be the most natural kind of extension of the employment area to the east of that. I think what the county's information is indicating is that there's still a lot of vacant land in the industrial park. And so it will take some time, even though it's spoken for and has plans attached to much of that land, it will take some time for that to come to its full potential in terms of building area and jobs. And then there are some existing industries in town as well that we know have expansion plans or have potential to expand on their remaining land. And so they're factoring that in as well, that there's some room to expand within future phases of existing industries. So I think that's why the numbers are coming out the way they are in terms of not demonstrating a need for more pure employment land.
So I guess there's no way that we can, in answer to your comments, no way we could look at a possible area, say out in the west end, that could be industrial?
There isn't a lot of land there that would go beyond what will be needed for, again, all those community area uses that I mentioned. But there isn't the growth plan allows municipalities to plan beyond the next 30 years for employment. You can't designate the land, but if the town wanted to initiate, an economic development strategy or employment land strategy or anything like that, and think beyond, what the LNA is telling us and what the county plan is preparing for, there would be no limitation for the town to do that. Okay. And it might be something that we recommend in future, so that we have a well in advance thought forward as to where that next employment area will go, as those types of uses tend to need a lot more help to get going with, shovel ready sites, access, servicing, all of those things, as opposed to just a blank slate of land like residential can go forward on its own.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? One of the other things that we've talked about at some length at the county level, and Steve, feel free to jump in if I'm not characterizing this quite accurately, but the way that this exercise should be viewed, I think, is basically as a planning tool. I mean, it's asking us to forecast for the next essentially 30 years. And it's sort of based on best guesses, given us, the snapshot in time that we're looking at now. But this is something that must be reviewed every 5 years, and I think actually could be reviewed more frequently than that if need dictated that. So let's take the process seriously, but let's not get too caught up in the notion that these are going to be the numbers that we're hitched to for the next 30 years, regardless of what changes may come. There will be plenty of time and plenty of opportunity for future councils to review this, given new information, and given new pressures or realities that they may face at those times. So it's really, I think, just a planning tool based on the information as we know it today, and sort of it's to provide some best guesses about what may potentially face this community down the road, so that we can start at least putting some plans in place to deal with that and accommodate that. Is that somewhat accurate, Steve, in layman's terms?
Yep, no, that's a good summary. It does reflect that it's supposed to be updated, every few years. The Planning Act says 5 years. In a worst case scenario, in terms of review timelines, if the county were to adopt a brand new official plan, it could defer the next review to a 10-year horizon. But that assumes, the province doesn't further update the growth plan and mandate an earlier review. So my experience has been these review cycles are happening, every 5 years or so. And, it's important to reflect on the changes that occur so that you're not locked into a 30-year plan that gets a little out of touch with current circumstances if you don't update it from time to time.
All right, any other questions or comments? Councillor Wagner?
Thank you very much, Mayor Mills. So just a kind of a quick question, I guess you could say, or an overview of, those of the community that might be watching right now and not quite understanding what, annexing means. If we are to annex, for one, does the town purchase that land from the municipality we're annexing it from? Do we then zone it, with our idea of how we want it zoned? And then do we offer it up for sale? So how does that kind of work? Just briefly to sort of explain to the community.
Yeah, that's a great question, and helpful because we get a lot of inquiries about that. So the typical process would not entail Shelburne as a municipality acquiring the land in terms of ownership, but rather bringing it into the town's political boundary. And so the land would in normal cases remain in private ownership. The annexation itself is not a process that changes the ownership of the land typically. And what it would mean is that, the people who are now have land in Shelburne that was formerly in Melancton or Amaranth, depending on where the annexation took place, would then, be part of the corporate limits of the town of Shelburne. That would mean for purposes of municipal elections, for purposes of taxation, for purposes of zoning and bylaws and services and all of those things. What normally happens is for the first number of years after land is annexed, it remains subject to the bylaws and official plan of the municipality it was formerly in. So if the land came from Amaranth, for example, it would still be subject to their official plan and bylaws, which become part of Shelburne's official plan and bylaws to the extent that it applies to the new land added to Shelburne's municipal boundary. And then Shelburne has an opportunity to update its documents to bring those lands in and designate them and zone them as it sees fit. It is no guarantee, though, that if land is annexed to Shelburne from another municipality, that it will become urban. So that's important to note that process often takes many years. And as we've seen, it has, in this case, taken many years for land to evolve to an urban use, even in the county official plan and the town official plan from when it was annexed 20 plus years ago on the west side. So that's a bit of an overview. It is not a process that's required. The town is not required to annex land, nor is any municipality adjoining Shelburne required to give up land to Shelburne or enter into an annexation agreement. But the town or those adjoining municipalities could initiate that type of process at any time. The typical requirement that the province wants to see addressed is that the two municipalities or three municipalities have come to an agreement that they all agree to, and typically there's a lot of public consultation, especially with the affected landowners through that process. And then the ministry has to sign off on that to make it effective and by order dictate that the lands are transferred from one municipal area to another municipal area.
So definitely.
So the last time this was done is like 20 plus years ago. It's been a while, but it is a process that happens from time to time.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much. That was really great information. I know I had a few people kind of ask me like, what does that all mean, right? So great. Thank you so much for that.
No problem.
Is it fair to say, Steve, that typically that's a process that's triggered or initiated by the developer? So whether it's residential or commercial, so that the landowner wishes to develop and would want those lands to be a part of Shelburne, for example. So they would sort of start those discussions and then the negotiations would take place between Shelburne and whatever neighboring municipality the lands are currently in.
That can be one triggering event that, would incentivize or convince a municipal council to decide to initiate the process. So if you were hearing from people who bought up land around the current boundary and or were interested in doing so and had some development plans that you thought made sense, then that might be one consideration. This council would say, yes, based on those ideas and plans, we think we should look into annexing some land. But it is often, independent of those private landowner requests and considerations. Is just the municipality that is seeing a future shortage of land for what it aspires to do, would enter those discussions with the adjoining municipality or municipalities to try and negotiate something. And then once an annexation agreement is reached, there is typically some transition provision in terms of the phasing in of the different taxes, transfer payments from, the municipality receiving the land to the municipality losing the assessment, and how the land will be serviced, et cetera.
Denise?
I just wanted to circle back to Steve's original comments when we went through the process with the adjustment in the land, or sorry, the population from 18.3 to back to 15.1, which is our 2049 projection. A lot of that initial conversation that we had through the group was based on what our treatment plan expansion was able to accommodate at 15,000. And the implications for the extra 3 with respect to, an expansion on a membrane that's just being expanded. So how does that affect this conversation about potential land being expanded? You'd have to also fully contemplate and do the fiscal analysis on the capital side of that. So right now we're maxing out the waste treatment plan at 15.1. And even again, it's a much future expansion in terms of population. You would need as a council to really consider, while you could want certain industry or different development to be brought within Shelburne's new boundary, how that affects surrounding municipalities' potential, you also need to really undertake a financial impact of how that would be paid for to support whatever kind of development you'd like to see. So I just didn't want that to be lost. There was a real prescriptive reason to keep us at 15.1 and have 2051 correspond, my years, that 10-year difference, so that they were back to being in sync again, so that we didn't have a presumption that not only would there be a boundary expansion impacting the adjacent municipalities, there would also be an immediate capital trigger to expand that treatment plan again. So I just wanted to make sure we all didn't lose sight of that conversation.
Okay. All right. Well, if that's it for discussion, then can I have a motion to receive Steve's report and to forward it along to the county to provide a summary of our comments? Moved by Councillor Fegan, seconded by Councillor Buffett. All in favor? It's carried. All right. And Steve, your last report is on the development charge annual indexing.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We do not typically request council direction or report to council on this, but I'm sure as council is well aware, it's been an interesting year in terms of the economy and inflationary factors, which is affecting all facets of things. And that's obviously no exception to municipal infrastructure and to housing, as well as the cost of non-residential buildings. So in a normal year, we would annually index the development charge rates by a prescribed index, which is set in the Development Charges Act and referenced in the town's development charges bylaws. And that is the non-residential building construction index. And it's based on the latest quarterly data available. Currently, that is Q1 2021 to Q1 2022. So over that period, 1 year or 12 months, the cost of non-residential building construction has increased by 17.3% for the Toronto CMA, which is the only, the closest available CMA data for Shelburne. And a normal increase annually for this indexing would be in the 1 to 5% range. And in the last 15 years that I've been working with the town, I haven't seen it exceed 8%, which was way back in 2008. So this is a very exceptional year in terms of inflationary factors. The data is already a few months old in that it's only to the end of Q1, and we expect to see the Q2 data maybe in the next month or two from Statistics Canada. But I think in discussing this at the staff level, and I also discussed it with the other planners of Dufferin County and looked at other municipal reports and approaches, it's at a level where it does warrant perhaps a different approach rather than just an immediate 17.3% increase to the rates. especially for those projects that are in process and had, I'm sure, done some accounting on what their costs would be and have entered into the process of pulling building permits. To have a sudden 17.3% hike on development charges, which for a single detached dwelling is about $4,500 a unit, is a pretty significant hit overnight. So our thought was to do two things as a recommendation to try and alleviate some of that immediate impact. One is to implement just half of the increase effective tonight if you were to approve the bylaw. And the second is to include some transition provisions. So if you have an application that's already in the queue and it's complete and a permit ought to have been issued by today's date based on it being filed at least 10 days within the last 10 days, then that you wouldn't be subject to the increased rate. The second component to that would be to do a further increase by October 31st. If the next round of inflationary statistics indicate that a lesser rate of inflation has occurred in the second quarter, we would just use that, half of that rate. But if it's the same or higher, we would implement the other 8.65% to get to the full 17.3%. And I think that's an appropriate balance just to recognize that that is a significant cost hike to development, but the town has also felt a significant pressure on the increase in cost for its infrastructure, which is ultimately what all these funds are collected for in the first place. And if you do not, increase the DCs by a rate that attempts to keep up with inflation, then the money will end up having to come from other sources such as taxes or grants, or the projects just won't be able to be completed when they are required. So it's not trying to be punitive for development, but trying to make sure that there's a fair balance there, recognizing the town's costs are increasing exponentially as well. We did, as I say, survey a number of other municipalities to see how they're dealing with this. Many do it earlier in the year, so hadn't quite seen the latest data yet. But we are seeing a number of municipalities that have adopted double-digit increases already this year, which again is very outside the norm for this type of inflationary increase. So in the recommendation, we're just seeking council direction to receive the report and to support the approach recommended in the report, phasing it in as noted. There are a whole range of different other options that could have been considered, but we felt that in considering that range of options, this is the one that strikes the right balance and keeps it relatively simple and straightforward to administer. Okay. So happy to take any questions on that if you have any.
Questions for Steve on this? I think it makes sense. I mean, the theoretical notion is that DCs are supposed to ensure that growth pays for growth, at least to some degree. And I mean, if our indexing is not keeping pace with the actual increases in prices that we're seeing, then that notion fails. So, obviously, I think it has to be realistic. But I do like the idea of phasing this. I think that's a fair way of doing it and allows us to take another look in October as to where things are at. So, any other thoughts, Deputy Mayor?
I concur with your comments and that of Steve. I think ultimately what is lost, I mean, we're trying to be fair to developers and not sort of slam them with increased costs right away. But ultimately, I think the people we need to be focusing on are the homeowners, because it's going to be passed on to them. No question about it, in my view. So I think by doing it this way, probably helps homeowners down the road, maybe to save a few shillings in the sense of the way that we're handling it right now. So I agree with it.
Councillor Buffett, did I see your hand?
Yeah, I just was concurring again with both Steve and the mayor, of course, in terms of your comments. I think it's fair to do something like that helps both sides. There may be some homes that already have started already, so they're not going to be able to pick up that, but most of those homes have already been purchased by people. So it would only be happening to the new ones, so they would know that would all be factored into the price.
All right, can I have a motion then to receive the report and to authorize kind of the phased approach to the indexing that Steve highlighted? Moved by Councillor Wagner, seconded by Councillor Buffett. All in favor? Carried. Okay. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
All right, take care. All right, next we have the Treasurer's report regarding municipal disposal of assets policy. Carrie.
Thank you, and through the mayor. Back in 2019, the town adopted a procurement policy which repealed the procurement bylaw of the day. That procurement bylaw also included disposal methods for assets. So attached with Appendix 1 is a new municipal disposal of assets policy. And what it does is establishes procedures that staff would follow to initiate the disposal of assets, including such things as furniture, tools, equipment, etc., that would be declared surplus, obsolete, or scrap. And the policy will allow for that to be done in an open and accountable manner. The policy does not include land or decommissioned assets such as computers or printers. And the policy would be reviewed at the beginning of every new council term. So other than that, the policy kind of speaks for itself, gives the steps for staff to follow. And all we're asking for tonight is for council to adopt the policy for us by passing the bylaw.
Okay. Any questions for Carrie on that? No? Okay. Can I have a motion then to receive Carrie's report and to authorize the bylaw to establish the policy? Councillor Fegan, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson. All in favor? It's carried. All right. Next is, thanks, Carrie. Next is a report from our clerk regarding an agreement with the County of Dufferin for 911 services. Jennifer.
Thank you. And through your worship, the current enhanced 911 service is scheduled to be decommissioned by the CRTC by March 2025. To facilitate the move to a new digital 911 service known as Next Generation 911 or NG 911, both levels of government are investing in the technology and infrastructure upgrades to support the transition to the new system. The county has been the 911 authority for the municipality since 1994. The purpose of the agreement is to set out the general terms regarding the delivery of 911 services to the municipality and sets out the roles, responsibilities, and obligations of the parties with respect to the service. The county will provide 911 services to the town of Shelburne in accordance with the CRTC directives, and additionally will act as the local 911 authority on behalf of the municipality and provide a next generation 911 enabled primary public safety answering point. So the county will be responsible for the costs associated with the provision of the new service. And alternatively, we are looking for enactment of the bylaw, which will authorize signing authority for the agreement with the county. Happy to take any questions if you have any.
All right. Any questions? Not really an optional proposition. Okay, can I have a motion then to receive the clerk's report and to enact the bylaw? Moved by Deputy Mayor Anderson, seconded by Councillor Fegan. All in favor? It's carried. All right. Next is another report from our clerk regarding a revised draft smoking and vaping bylaw.
Thank you. Through your worship, at the regular council meeting held June 27th, council reviewed a report LS 2022-13 regarding a newly proposed smoking and vaping bylaw. Staff was directed to return with a revised draft bylaw based on the comments made noting smoking and vaping on public sidewalks, smoking and vaping during special events, smoking and vaping at the nonprofit housing residence. Staff took the opportunity to engage the public by way of a survey through our town's and public engagement tool, Bang the Table. Results of the survey are attached as Appendix 1 to the report. And I'll just note a few of the survey results. A little over 57% support the proposed bylaw, while 29.6% oppose the bylaw. 64.5% support dedicated smoking areas during special events, while 32.8% do not support dedicated smoking areas. So I will address the comments made by council at the previous meeting. So in regards to smoking and vaping on public sidewalks, the proposed bylaw before you this evening has a updated definition of highway. Included in the definition is the passage of pedestrians and includes sidewalks and all other lands within the lateral boundaries of the highway. So that will allow smoking on sidewalks. Item number 2, smoking and vaping during special events. Section 4.3 of the bylaw allows for an exemption to be applied for through council 45 days prior to the event. Instead, it was previously noted at 60 days. Item number 3, smoking and vaping at the nonprofit housing residence. So part of that residence is covered under the Smoke-Free Ontario Act, and it notes that in multi-unit dwellings within indoor common areas, no smoking is permitted. I reached out to our management company, and they do have their own smoking policy. They have a no smoking policy, which became effective January 1st, 2017. Smoking is prohibited inside the building, including private units and on residential property. It's also noted smoking is not permitted within 3 meters of any doorway. That being said, their smoking policy is being adopted through attrition, which means existing tenants will be grandfathered or exempted for the length of their tenancies unless they choose to sign a no smoking policy lease addendum. And new tenants will sign leases with a no smoking policy included. And so we just wanted to note that staff continually receive complaints regarding secondhand smoke, specifically related to the downtown core area. The proposed bylaw before you this evening will be enforced reactively. Written complaints are required to be received. This will allow staff to address complaints that are received. It's important to note the Smoke-Free Ontario Act is enforced by public health officers and not municipal staff. So in the absence of having public health officers that may be available during weekends or after hours, this will allow our staff to address complaints that are received. So I'm happy to take any questions if you have any. That concludes my report.
Okay, I have Councillor Fegan and then Deputy Mayor Anderson.
The only one I want to talk about, and I'll take the place of Councillor Bernardo on this one, in regards to special events. The one issue that he took to the last presentation was the 60 days prior to an event being held. We've reduced that down to 45 days. So that still requires any event to have an application put before council a month and a half before the event takes place. Do we really need to have that much lead time before an event? What's the thought process behind that one?
Jennifer?
Through your worship to Councillor Fegan. Our creation of council agendas is an ongoing process, and so we continually work through each agenda. There is a requirement, a minimum 14-day requirement in advance of council agenda to be published. So it just allows us to be able to put placeholders in for certain delegations or requests for council. That can certainly be amended in the bylaw if council chooses to do so.
14 days. I'm just thinking that Councilor Bernardo was thinking that he wanted to have like 2 weeks since we meet every 2 weeks. But you guys do need your extra lead time. And I do know that a lot of people take their time in getting things into you. So 45 days, honestly, no, I think I'm comfortable with that. I think that gives you guys enough time to handle what you need to do, but also makes anybody who's planning an event aware that they've got to be on their toes.
Right.
So I'm okay with that.
Denise?
Yeah, sorry, through the mayor, just to echo what Jennifer said, and I think Councillor Fegan is referring to now. The 45 days is also beneficial for the event organizer to have notification of the decision of council. They then can plan accordingly. You may not support some of the requests. And if it's assumed that you say yes and you say no, that has a bearing on their ability to respond. So this is just why we originally said 60. Most events would want to know well in advance of their event what their inclusionary opportunities are or not. So 45 days may still be tight for some, but 45 days was at least a little bit less stringent given the direction that you'd asked us to consider.
Yeah, and as an event planner, I can certainly concur that that certainly makes a lot of sense. And I know that you guys go through an awful lot of work when we throw stuff at you for events as well. So yeah, it's good on both sides, in my opinion.
Mayor Anderson.
Yeah, just on the point of throwing more work at staff, my question is, since the bylaw is reactionary, do you anticipate this bringing on more work on staff, and do we ultimately have the capacity to be able to deal with these foreseeable complaints that will come down the road? Or was that already anticipated with some of the staffing and the new hires that we put into place? So that's my question, maybe even / concern.
Jennifer.
Thank you. And through your worship to Deputy Mayor Anderson, staff are continually receiving complaints currently. And so this will help us to address the current complaints that we have. In the absence of being able to have public health officials in town, this relates to outdoor patios where there's no smoking within 9 meters. And as you can see in the downtown core, we do have some outdoor patios that are directly below residential units. And so we do receive continual complaints. It's hard to anticipate if this will create extra work. We do have an extra staff member, and this will help give staff the mechanism to provide some form of enforcement when a complaint comes in.
Okay. Anybody else? No? Okay. All right. So the recommendation is to receive the report and to enact the bylaw, the revised bylaw, I guess, to incorporate the changes that Jennifer's highlighted. I have a mover and seconder for that. Moved by Councillor Fegan. Seconded by Councillor Buffett. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Okay. Next is a bylaw for our consideration to declare 420 Victoria Street surplus. Denise, would you like to speak to this one briefly?
Sure, Mayor Mills, thank you very much. So council had previously provided us with direction to proceed with the surplus process notification, which we completed. The bylaw allows council to declare the property formally surplus tonight. In the staff report, I had outlined what the tentative milestones were, and that it was really important for us as the town to achieve the record or site condition from the ministry, so that any potential buyer had that assurance that the property use, which any rezoning is 100% the responsibilities of the purchaser, didn't have any concerns about the status. So I had indicated that we expected the record of site condition process to take us to about January or February 2023. After that time, the town would administer the surplus process, and ultimately we would bring that back to council for your direction on who you would want us to sell the property to. There is not a base assumption that it would be the highest bid only in terms of this, but there would be a minimum on the property. And we would also initiate the appraisal value of property process as well as part of this. So I think everybody's aware that properties are still quite valuable in Shelburne. So we would hope, in terms of the goal, to not only have an end use that is beneficial to the community, but also to help the town, through council's direction, recover as much as we can the investment in the cleanup, which will probably be about 1.2 million in total. So if there's any other information, review, or background on the process that we outlined in the last applicable staff report, I'm happy to address any questions.
Okay. And just to be clear, that this bylaw is just formalizing the direction that we already gave. So.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Mills.
Any questions for Denise on process or timelines? Okay, can I have a mover and seconder then for that bylaw? Deputy Mayor Anderson, seconded by Councillor Buffett. All in favor? That's carried. All right. And the next one is a bylaw which simply authorizes us to enter into an agreement with the province to allow for the grant funding that we received under the Green Stream for Well 3. So I doubt that there are any questions on this one, but I don't see any. Okay, can I have a mover and seconder then for that? Moved by Councillor Buffett, seconded by Councillor Fegan. All in favor? Carried. Oh, sorry, Denise.
So because of the confidentiality of making this known, the public may just not be aware of the significant financial support we've received. I didn't know if you wanted Carrie to maybe reference that and how thrilled we are that we've received this grant and how important it was to the Well 3 project.
Sure, I think that would be entirely appropriate.
Okay, unfortunately, I don't have those numbers in front of me. 1 second.
It was a lot. 1.89 million.
No, it was more than that.
Okay, that's better.
If it's too hard to find, we can leave it at it's a lot for tonight. And then you can sort of remind us of the exact number later or at the next meeting, whatever works.
1 second here. I would like to give a number. It was 3.56 million.
Oh, big deal.
That's a lot more than I thought, perhaps.
And without that grant funding, I mean, that is an additional 3.5 million that we would have had to.
We would have had to borrow. Yes.
So, yeah.
We're very fortunate to receive that money.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. So the last item on the regular agenda is Deputy Mayor Anderson's notice of motion from the last meeting. And it reads as follows: be it resolved, the staff look into what it would take to have a transit stop installed near the new commercial development on Highway 89 and County Road 124, and report back to council regarding the possible options and costs associated. I know Denise had provided some comments at the last meeting that this is work that's probably underway, but I still think that we should forge ahead and formalize it. So is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Buffett. Any additional discussion on it? Deputy Mayor, do you want to sort of recap?
Yeah, just very briefly. We can't assume that everybody has adequate transportation in town, and as small as our town is, it's still for some quite difficult to maneuver from one area to the other. So simply just having an option for our residents who want to access our new plaza, the ability to do so, I think is the prudent thing to do. And I want to restate once again that this is not meant to take away from the business that we have in the downtown core. Of course, we want to encourage all of our residents to support all of our businesses in the town of Shelburne. But again, this is just ease of access for those who want to be able to use it. Thank you.
All right. Any further discussion on it? Okay, all in favor? That's carried. All right. Any notices of motion for tonight? Okay. 18 items listed under communications tonight. Was there anything that caught anybody's attention. Councillor Wagner?
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Mills. Just kind of quickly for item number 1, I wanted to thank the bylaw for giving us the update, because it's important that we kind of know what's going on since we've sort of asked for it. And obviously bylaw is always sort of at the forefront of our discussions. Just one quick question with regards to the one thing here where it's noted that property standards, there were 2 complaints filed, but then no notices given. So just wondering what would facilitate that, right? Like normally if there's a complaint made, there's a notice given, but was there no findings for those complaints in order to then facilitate a notice? So, I mean, I can obviously understand why there might not be no charges laid or going further with, after a notice has been given. But, usually if a complaint's made, then kind of the next step is a notice, right? But just wondering, just quick, don't need to go into too much detail, just a quick why.
Jennifer?
Thank you. Through your worship to Councillor Wagner. What the town of Shelburne does not have is a property standards committee. So the ability for us to issue orders and in order to make them comply, we have to have a property standards committee that allows them the ability to appeal the orders that are received. So right now, what we can do is we can give warnings and letters, issue warning letters, but we can't issue any orders because there is no appeal mechanism for residents to do that. That being said, we are working on restructuring certain committees within the town and engaging the property standards committee for the new term of council. So right now, there really isn't much for us to utilize in regards to enforcement mechanisms until we have a property standards committee that will allow residents that receive orders the ability to appeal the orders.
Okay, that makes sense. So definitely glad that it's at the forefront of our town staff's minds, and they're working towards making sure that we can, if need be. Thank you so much for that.
Anybody else? Communications? Okay. Can I have a motion then to receive those items that are listed for information? Councillor Wagner, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson. All in favor? That's carried. And a motion for our confirming bylaw by Councillor Buffett, seconded by Councillor Fegan. All in favor? Carried. And a motion to adjourn. Deputy Mayor Anderson, seconded by Councillor Fegan. All in favor? Carried. All right.
Sorry, Mayor Mills, I apologize for interrupting, just because the community may forget or not know that with the AMO and the August bit of a break, that the next meeting is a bit of a gap. So I didn't know if you wanted to share that.
Sure. The next one is August 29th?
9th, sorry.
The date? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So bit of a summer break for the first part of August, but we'll be back on the 29th, and I'm sure it'll be a lengthy agenda to work through that night. All right.